Driver's Seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca and today is Peggy's 54th registration day, and so I thought it would be good to do something a little bit different, reflect a little bit on the time that I've had on with her, reflect a little bit on the time that people had with her before me. And so I've spent a bit of time recently thinking about those people, those 5 previous owners that you see jotted down on the V5, and I really wanted to kind of have a bit of time thinking about them and thinking about kind of what they got up to with Peggy, what experiences they had in the 52 years she had driving around before I came across her. And so we're going to start off with kind of that, and it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to pull over somewhere a little bit quiet and read something out at the side of the road, rather than try and remember all my thoughts in one place. And it'll probably be the most coherent thing I've ever said on this podcast. And then we'll start back up and talk a little bit about what my future plans are, because to keep Peggy going, as people have done before me, that's going to need a little bit of planning and a little bit of forethought. So I thought I'd share some of those with you now. Dear Peggy's previous owners, I thought I'd drop you a line because I find myself thinking about you guys a lot. I know people often wonder about their previous cars, where they are now, if they're still out there, so I thought I'd stop you worrying. Today Peggy reaches her 54th year registered, and that's no mean feat. I want to start by thanking you all. You all played an important part in this car finding its way to my garage and my heart. So many cars get lost along the way, wind up in barns, hedges, or the scrapyard in the sky, and yet this little car was kept going by you all for 52 years. I'm fortunate to have years of receipts, MOT certificates and letters to restorers, all love letters to this silly little car that you all wrote and kept to make sure she continued to the present day. Don't worry, I've added a few of my own. New suspension here, welding there, even a few treats like a badge bar to celebrate this milestone. I often wonder about the adventures she had with you guys. She came to me with 96,000 miles on the clock, and I've now learnt she's reading a little under. That's probably around 100,000 miles of trips to the shops, car shows, maybe even some school runs and commuting. I'd like to think she took you on holidays into important days too. Since getting her, she's covered 25,000 miles with me. I've started a picnic blanket with sew-on badges of all the exciting adventures we've had together. But there's also been the mundane, daily trips that feel like freedom with your first car. I remember the gentleman who sold her to me sold her because he wasn't really using her. There's no such worries now. I still drive past some of the places she used to live according to the invoices. Do any of you see her and recognise that she's still going and that you played a part in that? When we go somewhere new together and she earns a new patch, I think about whether any of you had already taken her there, whether she ever did a really long drive and you were so proud that you got there without any issue. We took her on the Windermere ferry. Was that her first time on a ferry, or did one of you take her to Europe or Ireland or the Isle of Wight once? Sometimes when I take off a part or switch it out, I think about who was the last person to do that. Was it the factory, or did one of you have the same issue with that part 10-15 years ago? How about some of the modifications she's got? How did you decide you wanted a 5-speed gearbox? Where did the idea to fit a Howley manifold come from? I tell you what, there's an interesting receipt for an odd partial respray. Why stop at the waistline? Which one of you was so into your music you had to fit a radio and speakers? I'm really glad you did. It's made so many road trips and daily commutes so much more fun. I've been spotted more than a few times singing at the top of my voice in here. I find myself struggling to see why I would ever sell her. I often wonder why you guys did. Do you regret it? Wish you could buy her back? Did you stay with classic cars, or was she your first foray and you decided it wasn't for you? Did you have stable mates and when you had to downsize, she wasn't your favourite and had to go? Did you have plans for her that you didn't get done? I wonder if you still find Morris Minor spares in places you forgot about and think, oh, I meant to fit that. More importantly, why did you buy her? Did you fall in love with her instantly and have to have her? I know two of the owners live quite close to each other, although years apart. Did you know each other? Was it the typical, if you ever sell it, I want first refusal? And a deal was struck, and even though years later, when one of you had moved all the way to Wales, you stuck to it. What about that very first owner? Why a Morris Minor? Where in Northamptonshire did you spend your hard-earned money? How did you earn that money? Were you the envy of all your neighbours? Had you owned a car before that, or was that your first car too? Like you, I'm sure, I knew classic car ownership wouldn't be straightforward and easy. But unexpectedly, I've made so many friends since getting this car, met so many nice people, and even changed some of the minds of my existing friends about older cars. I'm really thankful of that. She's given me opportunities I couldn't ever imagine. She's on a Christmas card now, you know. And it brought me closer to some important people in my life too. Most importantly, she makes me smile every time I drive her, and I hope she did the same to you. So to conclude, if you ever happen to stumble across this and at one point you had your name on the V5 of PRP353G, please get in touch. I'd love to get some answers to some of the things I've asked today and some of the things I often wonder about. I'd love to hear your stories and memories. They're as much a part of this car as the vinyl, metal and rubber. It might only be another Morris Minor, but she's important to me, and as many of her adventures should be shared as possible so others might see that too. So drive safely in whatever you drive now, and thanks for happy motoring. So I know that was a little bit different, but I think that a lot of you listening who own your own classic cars or have owned classic cars at some point will be able to share some of the sentiments that I experienced when thinking about writing that letter to the previous owners. And who knows, one of them might crop up, might stumble across this video and see kind of what I've done with her and want to get in touch, and I think that would be fantastic to reunite her with some of the people that have had her before. So I thought a second half of this podcast would be looking to the future. What sort of things is it that I'd like to kind of work on going forward? What would I like to achieve before her 55th registration day next year? Most recently, I've had to get some welding done, like I mentioned in the letter. At the time of recording it, it's hopefully going ahead tomorrow, but it'll all be done hopefully for her registration day when this goes out. And that's just kind of one of those important things that you've got to keep on top of and make sure that everything's still solid and together to give it the best chance of going forward. I've also had to look into some mechanical work. The engine is probably getting quite tired at the amount of miles that it's done. It needs a little bit of a refresh and some of the oil leaks dealing with. So hopefully we can kind of look into that in the not too distant future too. I think I also need to seriously start saving up for some bodywork. Her rust bubbles and things aren't getting any better, and some of her wings are probably not, the where the rust is, it's not in a place that's going to be easily repairable, so in reality I'm going to need some new wings for her. So I'll have to start saving up for those, because to keep her solid on the outside as well, that's going to be a pretty important thing to do. Now, Peggy's been a beautiful daily driver and will continue to be a daily driver as much as I can. But Jamie and I have had to have a little think about what kind of is our backup plans if either of our cars don't run or it's a particularly salty day out on the roads over winter, just to give the cars the best chance of carrying on. And so we've started thinking about a serious replacement for his old Fiat Panda. We don't enjoy it, we don't like driving it, and so we avoid it at all costs. So it means that if something goes wrong with the cars, we do a very quick repair that can feel a little bit panicked in some cases. And I think if we had a good, reliable, cheap, modern-ish something on the road that we could trust, then it would mean that sometimes we would be more comfortable with giving ourselves a day or two extra to work on whatever goes wrong with the cars and keep them off the road in more salty conditions. I can use the kind of modern option and he can use his bike. So that's kind of something that we're looking into. She's still going to be a daily, and we're still going to be using her very frequently, so don't worry, there won't be kind of a big change here on the channel as far as I can see in the too distant future. But sometimes it's a sensible choice that has to be made occasionally, just to have a little bit of a backup plan. We've got to look into Peggy's garaging situation. Wyvern, the Spitfire, has stolen Peggy's garage recently. Given that it's not got a roof, it seemed the most sensible thing to store in the garage that we've got, and so Peggy's been out on the driveway, and we want to look for some sort of solution to putting Peggy back under cover, or more likely Peggy back in her garage and Wyvern under some sort of cover. So we're looking at like temporary garages and things like that. We live in quite a windy area, and so the long-term plan is definitely to extend out the existing garage towards the back of the garden, but we're looking for kind of a cheaper temporary option so that we make sure that we're sorted for winter. So if you've got any recommendations of like inflatable garages or like things that are quite hardy, because like I said, we're in quite a windy area here. A not so serious one, I guess, is to collect a few badges for the badge bar that I put on. I've always admired the enamel badges on the front of classic cars and vintage cars, and there was one particular badge which is the Woman Drivers Association that I've seen on a friend's car a few times and really love. So I wanted to get one of those for Peggy, and as a result had to get a badge bar. So I guess over the next year I'll probably see if I can pick up a few other interesting badges just to decorate that badge bar a little bit more. We're going to carry on work on the picnic blanket. We've done really well, and it's not far off being a complete picnic blanket, so I definitely want to make sure her picnic blanket is filled with all of our adventure locations sewn on before her 55th registration day, and I'm sure it'll feel like quite the sense of achievement when that happens, so I'm really looking forward to it. I think I'd perhaps like to look into hosting a meet. We're quite a small, growing little community here on the Passenger Seat podcast, but I think it'd be really nice to kind of host a gathering of people at some point. I know a few places that look quite good for us all to get together at some point. It's probably not going to be on the cards until sometime next year, but I think that could be really fun. And I'm obviously getting quite a bit of practice hosting these sort of things with the young members at the moment. So it'd be nice to put some of that practice to meet you guys as well. And finally, probably my most important plan going forward is to keep using Peggy, keep recording as much about our adventures and sharing them in all the various places that I do. Not just because it's nice to share with you guys, but also because it's a really nice kind of memento and kind of reflection for me about kind of how far I've come, how much we've managed to do with the car, and yeah, I'd really like to think that by doing this, we've kind of educated a few people about classic car ownership. We've talked to a few people and gathered some of their memories about classic car ownership, and kind of shown some of the realities of what owning a car like this can be, and perhaps persuaded a few people to think about it or consider it, because it's such a different way of experiencing the roads, and I think more people should consider it. It's such an interesting way of life, and I think more people should hear about kind of the realities of owning cars, loving cars, enjoying cars, and the lifestyle that comes with it, in the hope of preserving that for people going forward. I've already recorded some really interesting stuff ready for the next season of the podcast, which will start in October. We've still got one more episode left of this podcast, and I'm really looking forward to sharing those exciting recordings with you. So make sure that you're following and subscribed on whatever platform it is that you listen to, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this little bit of something different, and if you're listening today on the 1st of September when this has come out, perhaps consider raising a glass or a cup of tea or whatever it might be to Peggy's 54th year on the road. And on that note, thank you ever so much for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.